So first things first, Kurt.
Yes,
How are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
That's very good to hear. I'm doing well as well. So where I kind of want to pick up is I'm not sure if you remember, but we sat in this very same room
I was
a
trying to
couple of years ago.
remember, but yeah, I think we were facing that way.
That might have been true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I put on this new album, it felt like a continuation of kind of what you were
Yeah.
doing on the previous one. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sure. There's a lot of elements of what was happening in the previous record that was part of this one. I think I went about creating the record in a different way, and that's why I think is the difference between those two things. Mainly, I was collaborating with another writer, another artist, and so like I guess about 5 or so of the songs on this new record were a result of this crazy collaboration we were doing together, and so I think definitely changed the way I went about actually writing songs as opposed to the way I used to do it before. And that was a big change, I think.
Well, this is Matt
Matthew McCaughan, yeah.
McCaughan. We'll get to him in a bit.
Sure.
But first, I'd like to go into a little bit more of the musical direction of sorts, because I wondered, in your youth, did you listen to a lot of kind of experimental music?
Oh yeah, I mean, I listened to even when I was like a pretty young guy. My parents would take me to like these. They were almost like art happenings or something. But there was the one of the pioneers of the Moog synthesizer who lived in Nashville. His name was Gil Trithal, and he would do these sort of happenings, if you want to call it that. That's what they called them in the '60s, right? They were like these art things. But he would do these performances, and back then he was one of the few people who actually had a Moog synthesizer, and it was giant. It almost filled an entire orchestra pit with all these components and modules and stuff. And he would inflate this, I don't know, some kind of plastic bubble, and he would put everything inside that, and he would be inside that, and it would be sort of lit up, and that's where he would perform out of this bubble. And so I went to stuff like that he would do. So yeah, my folks were interested a lot in classical music in general, but they also were sort of dabbling in the notion of whatever was experimental at the time. And in Nashville, that's a pretty rare thing. It mainly was a country music town, and there was a definite classical symphony. There was quartet, stuff like that, and they were really into checking out all that stuff as well.
One thing that has struck me about your music is that you aren't afraid to try something.
Yeah, well, that's what keeps it exciting for me. Is that I listen to contemporary music, and I'm really excited about the things I hear, and I always have to wonder, well, how did they do that, and how does this, and being curious like that, and then I want to try to see if I can adapt that stuff to what I'm doing, but do it in a way that feels natural to me, and I don't, I'm not like being I'm not being dishonest with what I'm trying to present. I'm not trying to be someone I'm not.
Sure. But can I assume then, because this is to me always interesting, do you have a whole slew of failed experiments, so to say?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and maybe it failed. I don't think you ever really fail. I think even those kind of things that you make that aren't as good or whatever, you benefit from that experience, and sometimes more so than if something is successful. The mistakes you make, I think, are more valuable if you learn from them. If you continue to do the same mistake over again, then you're not really learning from the mistake, you know.
So with that in mind, and having made this new album, then how do you look back at FLOTUS?
At FLOTUS, I look at it as pretty much like a transitional album in a way because I think I was just starting to apply these ideas, and I was still learning a lot about that. I mean, I was still learning how to make beats. There was a lot of things that I was just now starting to understand of what Ableton technology is. I don't even think I used Ableton at all except after the fact with FLOTUS, and that's when I actually started learning about it. And in the process of learning that program, I was able to then write this new record in a different way, and that was really helpful.
And when you started, obviously, along the way you met Matt, and then
Yeah.
I suppose things kind of veered off a little bit. But or did you have that in mind?
Well, I definitely was. What was going on? I went to a party and his brother's 50th birthday party, and I've known Matthew since he was a kid. And he became this great musician and all that stuff, but we never really worked together or anything like that. We were talking at a party. He was telling me what he was getting into, and he was getting into like the modular synthesizer world, like this thing called a Euro rack with all these cool little components. And he was trying to learn about that, and he was asking me what I was up to, and I said, well, I'm sort of getting into beats and trying to figure out how to make these things. And he was saying, well, hey, can you just send me like an a cappella vocal or something like that I can process it, and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So I did that, and then he sent me back what turned into the title song of the record. And then from there, I messed around with it and then sent it back to him. And so we started sort of this sort of pen pal relationship as far as creating music together. I didn't know if we were going to make a record or anything, but we were both sort of curious to see where it went because it seemed pretty exciting. And the first thing happened pretty quickly overall, and we were like, wow, this is really cool.
And at this point, had you already written a bunch of songs, or was this
Not
kind
really.
of one of the first in?
I was definitely intending on working on stuff, and it just coincided with I had the time more or less to start to focus on that. But again, I wasn't quite sure where we were going with it, and I'm sure he wasn't at all. But we would send me this stuff it was just they were like performances, like musical performances that would start in one way and transition into various other things. Just basically processing the various sounds that I had maybe given him or something like that. And then when I got it back, I would take that performance, and then there's a real simple thing in Ableton where you can take analog information and change it to digital. And when you do that, then it becomes MIDI information, and then from that you can make that MIDI information sound like a piano or whatever, and you can it extracts like information that's rooted in the actual thing that he sent me, so it's connected in that way. So that suddenly I'm being able to create chords and a key signature or whatever from the actual thing that he sent me, which is pretty abstract and amorphous and maybe ambient. But suddenly you're extracting that kind of information, and so it's rooted in that, and I don't have to arbitrarily decide, well, this is going to be an F, and I'm going to make these chords, and I'm going to slap it on there. It's already intrinsically attached to the sound that he gave me. And so with that attachment, and then I went, well, that's connected in that way, and all I had to do was really try to find a way to preserve the quality that he had, whatever that piece was, and yet shorten it and edit it in a way. And I discovered in the editing process that if you keep the transitions where he's turning the knob and it's changing into something else, and you just kind of get rid of the meat of the thing or the actual for a while, and you hang on to the transitions, you're sort of preserving the performance aspect of what he's doing. So, and I was concerned with trying to respect that information because I wanted it to be, that was his contribution to the music. And so that was a great way to write. And so somehow I would eventually construct a song based on that information. And then the only other thing to do after that is to then include the members of the band. And so it was just, instead of just like a demo where you just sing and play a guitar and then you develop it from there, that was the singing and playing of the guitar was the thing that I created with Matthew. So technically, I guess, it is songwriting, right? But it's just done in a different way.
Well, what I found interesting about that songwriting then is because, well, over the years, you've worked with many people in all kinds of different, different contexts.
Yeah.
Was it in a, but I suppose the songwriting element has always been mostly, is that fair to say, mostly your thing?
Yeah, I mean,
your brainchild.
That's pretty much, it's the vehicle for my songwriting. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what Lambchop is and always was, because nobody else wanted to sing or write songs. They just wanted to play other people's music, you know, which I didn't find as interesting, you know, mainly because I'm not really good at it, but I could figure out my own stuff.
But in a sense, then, was it liberating or kind of constricting to have, like you say, those chords or those melodies to follow?
Oh, you mean
but then to write in a sense with somebody else's?
Well, that was fun, and what was fun, it was almost like archaeology or something, where you're sort of digging through stuff, and then you find these interesting little things. So it was like almost like a treasure hunt or something, where you're just like, and just to like decode a message or something like that. So you didn't really know what you were going to find, you know. But when you found it, you're like, oh, that's neat, and then away you go.
And well, this ties into something else I wanted to get onto, which is a line from the final song, "Flower." Which separates itself a little bit from the other songs, I suppose.
Absolutely, yeah.
But before we get into the song world, there's a line in there talking about the perfect song.
Yeah.
So and the 3 chords. You can, if you give me the 3 chords, I can write you the perfect song. And so my question to you is, what for you constitutes as a good song, or what would constitute as a perfect song, or even though it's probably impossible?
Well, I think it is impossible, and I think in a lot of ways the notion of a perfect anything is pretty odd. But nonetheless, we do strive to look for perfection in everything. That particularly in like the creative arts and things like that, the notion of perfection is attractive and worth striving for, and probably never achieving, you know. But I think the idea is out there that maybe somewhere there is and for a lot of people, they have a song in their life. It's, oh, that's the perfect. For me, I that could be true for 10 minutes, and then something else comes along. You know?
But I've always wondered this, because I'm not a songwriter, but is it in a sense writing songs and then that creative aspect of it, is it kind of this elusive chase of the perfect song?
I think that's part of it. I think it's always exciting when you do find something that you're happy with, and you're like, oh yeah, that's a good one. But I'm also excited whenever it just appears, even if it's maybe not so good in the end. I mean, I've tried all kinds of ways of writing and exploring the idea of writing songs. Forcing myself to do one every day, and all those sort of experiments that one can do to see what happens. And I do like to experiment with, like, get a concept or an idea and then see what the result will be. And I've had varying levels of success with that. I've made a lot of bad music. There's no doubt about it. And I'm not that ashamed of that. I'm just glad that eventually I make something good every now and then.
But again, that's then what you mentioned earlier. You have to go through those failures to end up
Yeah,
at something.
absolutely. Yeah.
With that song, Flower, well, there's one thing that struck me about just looking at the titles. There's the word "you" in every one of them.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
sense of the other. I thought. What made Flower so different?
Well, my idea was in a way to arrange the songs as sort of it's suggesting of like an intimate conversation, much like we're having now, just one person to another person, as opposed to a collective audience or some vague idea of them or whatever. I wanted it to be more specific and hopefully at least draw a person into feeling like they're just being intimately communicated with. And so in the course of the record, as it moves on, I think the notion of the way I'm processing the voice, there's a lot of variety in it, and then eventually starts to sort of strip away. So by the second to the last song, which actually was the first song we made, there's not a lot of processing happening in the voice or the lyrical information. By the last song, I wanted it to completely disappear, and even I made sure that when we mastered it, that it was mastered at a lower level so that it wasn't as jacked as, so it had a softer effect on you as a listener, particularly if you're listening to it as opposed to what had come before it, so that it's almost like a postscript or a PS or kind of thing.
Okay, and well, talking about the kind of having an intimate conversation throughout the record, I wrote down a couple of lyrics and then not the whole bits, but there's some elements I think that are interesting. So I have to make sure it's the right song. In "The Air is Heavy and I Should Be Listening to You," there's a line that says, "This is the new not normal."
Yeah.
Which I found very interesting.
Yeah, well, I mean, you hear a lot, at least where I live, about the new normal and all this stuff, and to me, it is very abnormal what's happening. And but it's becoming so frequent, and it happens so much that you have to ask yourself, what the fuck is this? What's going on? Is this the new not normal? Is that now the new normal, or it's to be completely not normal? And I wonder about that. I just thought it was an odd occurrence in what's going on in my life for the last few years.
Because one thing, and we don't have to get into too much politics and all that kind of stuff, but one thing I find interesting about kind of that idea of the new not normal is, and now that I haven't been in America for a while, but does it, those identity politics and people going at each other all the time, is it very pervasive, or is it just the media portraying it as such?
Well, I think the media is responsible for a lot of its hype. Yeah, absolutely. I think they perpetuate. They are a player in this tragedy that we're experiencing. And they have a responsibility to accept, to acknowledge that, I think, because I think the presence of media in our lives in general, and I'm mainly talking about social media,
sure.
But social media is now manipulated and part of our lives, and media is manipulated, and it's what gets your attention. It's a fight for people's attention,
right.
And what gets people's attention, unfortunately, is a lot of bad shit. Essentially, just outrageous, fucking horrible shit, and that's on them, as much as anything. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, everyone could choose to. You could be more selective about the things you report in the world, and I think we would all be a little bit better off for it. You know.
And I think we don't have to go into technology too much because I think we went last time. But one thing I like about your approach to technology is that you take the good bits and use it instead of...
Yeah. I mean, I think it's one of the cool things. I mean, I've always liked the notion of editing and through that process, you can shape things that are pretty banal and not really interesting and turn them into something sometimes quite beautiful, or sometimes at least to the point where you provoke thought or an idea that wouldn't have existed unless you had contrasted and cut and pasted this information in a certain way. I think it's just a lot of fun and a challenge to take a normal event, and just by moving things around, you can certainly have it have a different meaning and context. And I'm fascinated by that because it's all based on truth. So it is rooted in some sort of reality. So it's not fiction, but it's a way of manipulating information and creating your own sort of story or meaning.
And in terms of the music, then, is that your approach? Well, we talked a little bit about it, but in songwriting, then, where you kind of dissect and
absolutely, yeah, it's very much the same process. And as far as the way I've always written, at least as far as the lyrical side of it, that's been my approach. It really got easier once they had created like word processing. Once you can cut and paste and move things around, boy, I got really excited about that. I was like, oh, this is so much fun. And before that, it was just writing and crossing out and getting, but this made it so much more direct and simpler. And once I adapted to that, and now I'm doing that with music itself by extracting information from something that's completely abstracted and could be just noise for 25 minutes, and then somehow finding information from that's connected and rooted to it, but then I'm taking it and moving it around. So
just one thought that occurs to me now is, and maybe a little bit playing devil's advocate, but we talked about technology and the hold it has on our life, and the immense amount of information that we have to process. So in that sense, do you think it's more difficult to kind of focus in on what, because I can imagine if you're a songwriter, if you're creative, that you now have so many impulses and that it's difficult to find, oh, I like this, oh, but I also like this, and I also, that there's...
Yeah, I understand that, and I actually know other artists that sometimes try to put everything they know all into every piece of thing they know they do, and it can be exhausting to listen to. And so I think that's the at least that's what I use as sort of a marker for knowing not to do too much within any one particular thing. And I'm more and more attracted these days, at least in my casual listening, to things that are a little less cluttered. And I mean, that's something I like about most hip hop. It's pretty simple as far as what you're given to process in your brain. Beat, voice, some sort of stuff, and that's pretty much it. And so I like that. But so more and more I'm interested in like music that's fairly minimal as far as its elements, but the quality of the elements is what I think I try to zoom in on, and yeah. But yeah, I'm much more into, these days, I guess, listening to stuff that's a little more minimal as far as its information that it's giving you.
Finally then, well, it's the title song, The New Isn't So You Anymore. When did that thought kind of come into your mind?
I don't know. I guess I was just sort of thinking about, well, I think that probably came into my mind when was getting close to my 60th birthday, and it was this sort of, it's just, you know, what old dudes do. Eventually they start reflecting on, yes, the fact that, yeah, maybe you are getting older, yeah, accepting that notion, you know.
Because when I read it, it's also, to me at least, it feels very much a way of well, the fact of the way you approach music, I suppose, where you're not looking for the new, you're just going and trying some stuff out. And,
Sure, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering if the new isn't so you anymore. If you wondered about kind of what your musical identity was, and perhaps we can.
Yeah. I definitely was thinking about that. It's sort of an interesting contradiction what's going on, and I'm saying in that song, and how I go about the musical thing that I do. But I think it's more about, I guess, I was also thinking about my place or my role in my life, you know, as a person, and a contributor. How long am I going to be relevant to what? And maybe that is up to me. I don't know. How long is really my choice, but you know, I still have the energy and the desire to keep making new things, and that's certainly what I enjoy the most, is making things and making records and music, like recording things. To me, that this is one thing that you can sort of you just sort of have a little bit of control over. Everything else, when you get out here and do the play live and travel and all that stuff, there's so many elements of it that you're so not in control of, that you sort of have to accept and also adapt to, because it's always changing. You know, just even traveling is crazy, you know, and it keeps getting weirder.
Well, we were talking about your kind of flying schedule for these press things, so I can imagine.
Yeah, but that's just like one little element of it, and just the fact that people do that and are able to pull it off is pretty amazing, considering there are a lot of obstacles that you have to overcome. So when you do go to see a show and somebody's playing music, you don't think about that, all the things that maybe it took for that moment to actually occur. It actually is pretty remarkable that it happens at all.
Right.
And sometimes it doesn't, you know. But yeah, it seems like it just keeps getting harder and harder to do it. And definitely harder and harder to make a living at it. And so I have to assume that over half the people who are out here doing this thing aren't making a living. And,
right.
And that's remarkable too, that here we are, and here we're doing it. And I don't know what that says about stuff, but for me, I think it's commendable. It's just maybe a hard thing to sustain over the course of 25, 30 years.
Sure. Final question then. Can you see yourself, because I don't know if you still enjoy that element then of it, the kind of the touring. But
I like the playing and performing a lot. Every other aspect of it, I'm pretty much over. Yeah.
Because, but I have spoken to musicians who kind of. One distinctly I remember is Dan Auerbach, who I believe is in Nashville as well. But he told me that he would love if he could just sit in the studio and work and be creative instead of having to tour all the time.
Well, I feel the same way.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I do understand that they're connected, and but at some point in your creative life, as you get older, I'm trying to figure out a way to sort of adjust the expectations of what is required when you release music. And I'm fine with that. I just would like to do it in a way that is gradual, as opposed to something dramatic like I am going to stop playing forever
Right.
and just make records. Well, nobody's really going to care about that after a year. So I want to find a way just to do what's possible and what makes sense for me in this point in time. And the next point in time, 5 years from now, it's going to be something different. But
Sure.
at least I'm acknowledging that, yes, there needs to be some sort of transition.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
All right, Kurt, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
time. Thank
Great.
you.